High in the icy wind-blasted heights of the Himalayas, where oxygen is scarce and cold is bone-crushing, soldiers from two nuclear-armed nations stand inches apart. No bullets, no airstrikes, just fists, rocks, and crude weapons wrapped in barbed wire. This is the India-China border, one of the most volatile and least understood conflicts in modern geopolitics. But why? We are talking about barren valleys, frozen lakes, and mountain passes so remote that even satellites barely notice them. There are no bustling cities here, no oil, no fertile lands. Just ice, rock, and an unshakable refusal to back down. So what makes this land worth the risk of war? And here's the wild part. This isn't new. This has been simmering for over a century. To really understand why, we need to rewind the clock all the way back to a time when a single line on a map set the stage for one of the most dangerous standoffs in the world today. My name is Shyam, and let's unravel this thread. Back in the early 1900s, the British were doing what they did best: drawing borders on a map with zero regard for people who actually lived there. One of those lines is the McMahon Line, drawn in 1914 at the Simla Conference. The British and Tibetan officials sat down and casually decided this is the border between British India and Tibet. Done deal. And just like that, a 550-mile boundary was drawn across some of the harshest terrain on Earth. But here's the catch. China never agreed to it. At the time, Tibet was technically part of China, but it was running its own show. So when China saw this agreement, they said, wait a minute, Tibet had no right to sign anything. From that moment on, China refused to recognize the McMahon Line, calling it illegal and invalid. Fast forward to 1947, India gains independence and inherits these British-drawn borders, including the McMahon Line. Meanwhile, China had its own revolution. By 1949, Mao Zedong's Communist Party took over China. By 1950, Tibet was fully annexed. Suddenly, the India-China border wasn't just a remote line on a map. And here's where things spiral into chaos. The McMahon Line was never physically marked. No fences, no signs, just glaciers, rivers, and disputed land. Both sides claimed the same remote areas, and neither wanted to give an inch. By 1950s, tensions were boiling over. India, under Prime Minister Nehru, gave asylum to Dalai Lama after he fled China in 1959. That infuriated China. Meanwhile, both countries started building roads and military posts, creeping closer to each other. This wasn't just about territory anymore. This was a full-blown geopolitical showdown. And in 1962, everything exploded into war. By the late 1950s, the India-China border was a ticking time bomb. India pushed deeper into disputed areas with its forward policy, setting up new military outposts. From Mao Zedong's perspective, this was a direct provocation. So in October 1962, China launched a devastating surprise attack, an invasion. At 15,000 feet above sea level, the Himalayan battlefield was pure hell. Oxygen was scarce. Temperatures plunged below freezing. Indian soldiers were outnumbered, under-equipped, and trapped in brutal conditions. The Chinese forces smashed through Indian defenses in the east, storming into Arunachal Pradesh. In the west, Near Ladakh, Indian troops fought hard but were eventually overwhelmed. Within a month, India had lost thousands of square miles of territory. By the end of it, over 1,300 Indian soldiers were killed, over 1,000 went missing, and nearly 4,000 were captured. China, on the other hand, reported around 700 casualties, though many believe the real number was much higher. And then, just like that, it was over. On November 21st, 1962, China declared a unilateral ceasefire and pulled back most of its forces. They had made their point. But for India, the scars of 1962 never fully healed. For the soldiers, the war ended. But for the families of those who never came back, the pain never did. Fathers who never returned, sons lost in the mountains, mothers who spent decades waiting for closure. For them, 1962 wasn't just a historical event. It was a wound that never truly closed. So, after the 1962 war, you would think India and China would have figured things out, right? Nope. Instead of a real border, what we got was the Line of Actual Control, or LAC, a 2,300-mile-long military-controlled boundary that neither country actually agrees on. Seriously, it's a line in sand, or rather snow. China insists the LAC is here. India argues it's somewhere else. And neither is backing down. This isn't some clearly marked international border with fences and passport controls. It's a coastline in the mountains. No barbed wire, no walls, just shifting rivers, glaciers, and competing military patrols. And because nobody exactly knows where one country's territory ends and the others begin, troops constantly run into each other. And when that happens, we have shouting matches, shoving each other, and sometimes full-blown fistfights. And since both sides agreed not to use guns, these clashes looked less like modern warfare and more like a medieval battle. But sometimes, things turn deadly. Hey, at this point you might be wondering, if this border dispute was never resolved, does this mean we are heading towards another war? Or is this just a cold conflict that will never fully ignite? Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear your take. Now, let's get back to the story. It's June 15th, 2020. The Himalayas are silent except for roaring winds over Galwan Valley. In the darkness, Indian and Chinese soldiers face off at 14,000 feet above sea level. Both sides had agreed to de-escalate tensions along LAC, but something went wrong. Nobody fired a gun. Instead, what followed was one of the most brutal hand-to-hand battles in modern military history. Under the freezing sky, the fight began with fists and shoving. Then, the weapons came out. Iron rods, barbed wire wrapped clubs, rocks, fists, and sheer rage. The battle went on for 6 hours. The terrain itself became a weapon. Soldiers were pushed off cliffs, some drowned in the freezing Galwan River. By the time it was over, 20 Indian soldiers were dead. China admitted to only 4 casualties, but satellite image suggests their numbers were much higher. For the first time in 45 years, soldiers had actually died in an India-China border fight. The shockwaves reverberated across the world. India was outraged. Public anger surged. People boycotted Chinese goods and demanded military retaliation. The Indian government immediately banned 200 plus Chinese apps, including TikTok and WeChat, to send a message. Meanwhile, both nations began massing troops, tanks, and fighter jets along the border. The Himalayas, once a frozen no-man's land, were now one of the most militarized regions on Earth. You might be thinking, okay, but why does this dispute matter to the world? Because this isn't just about icy mountains. This is about power, control, and the future of Asia. China isn't rushing in with tanks. It's using a slow, patient strategy. It moves into disputed areas, builds military outposts, roads, and infrastructure, and before anyone reacts, it's already theirs. Think of it like this. Imagine your neighbor borrowing a little bit of your backyard every month. At first, it's just a few inches, so you don't really say anything. A year later, your whole backyard is gone. And that's the salami slicing strategy. And China's not just doing this in the Himalayas. It's pulling the same move in South China Sea, building artificial islands and claiming them as its own. China isn't just claiming land, it's building its way to dominance. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, China is pumping billions into infrastructure projects across Pakistan, Nepal, and Central Asia. This is surrounding India with Chinese-funded highways, railways, and ports. Why does this matter? Because in a future conflict, whoever controls the roads controls the battlefield. India knows this, and it's not sitting back. In 2021 alone, India built 100 new border roads, trying to match China's rapid expansion. The Himalayas are no longer just a remote battlefield. They are becoming a high-tech war zone. This isn't just India versus China anymore. Other global players have skin in the game. The United States sees India as a key counterbalance to China and has been strengthening its ties through groups like the Quad. India, US, Japan, and Australia. Russia, now that's tricky. Russia is India's biggest weapon supplier, but it's also very close to China. If a war breaks out, Russia probably stays neutral. And Europe? It's watching closely, because if things escalate, global trade routes could be disrupted. So yeah, this border dispute, it's a lot bigger than it actually looks. Could the India-China border dispute lead to a war? Technically, yes. But will it? Probably not. Here's why. Both India and China have massive armies. China's is the largest in the world, and India's is the second largest. A full-scale war would mean millions of soldiers in action, unthinkable destruction, and nuclear risk, which could be total disaster. And let's be real, no one wants that. So what happens next? I think more of the same. More road building, more standoffs, and more diplomatic talks. Every now and then tensions flare up and the world holds its breath, hoping it doesn't get worse. Not all conflicts make headlines. Some just linger, silent, slow-burning, and unresolved. And this one, it has been smoldering for decades. Because borders aren't just lines on a map. They are drawn in history, in pride, and in pain. Until those deeper lines are addressed, the mountains will keep echoing with footsteps, and the world will keep holding its breath. So what do you think? Is this a conflict destined to flare up again and again? Or is there a real path to peace? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear where you stand. And if you found this deep dive valuable, hit like, subscribe, and share, because this story, It's far from over. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.